Like thousands of people across the country, I've become frustrated with Nintendo's continued underproduction of their classic consoles. In the wake of this unsatisfied demand, it's not surprising that other players would move in to capitalize on it. One such company is AtGames, which has produced the Atari Flashback 8 with 105 built-in games and the Genesis Classic Game Console with 81 games. The best prices I could find for these two units was $39.99 at Bed Bath & Beyond. However, you can usually get 20% off coupons off the internet, so you're talking $32 a piece. Let's take a closer look at each console and the games each one offers. Both the main console and the two controllers are quite a bit larger and bulkier in the Atari than in the Genesis unit. Before buying either of these units, I recommend checking out the back of your television set to make sure that it has component audio and video inputs. If it doesn't, you're going to need an adapter. These cables are only 5 or 6 feet long, so unless you want to play with your nose pressed up against the screen of your television set, you're going to need to get an extension and also unions to connect these cables to the extensions, and that's going to run you another $15. While the main console is advertised as coming with 105 games preloaded, I recommend you take that with a big grain of salt. The reason is this: I've gone through all 105 games. The first thing I found is that 12 of them won't play. The controllers have little or no effect on the game at all, so you can't play them. Another 43 worked, but only partially. An example is the bowling game. You can play the first person all the way through, and then it locks up. You can't access the second person, they can't play. Finally, there were 33 games that did play, but were so lame or so difficult to play or just looked bad that they weren't any fun. Also in this group was a couple of games like Pong, which worked, but the controllers have so little control. These are really pretty much just on-off things. You couldn't control the paddle well enough to play the game. You tend to overshoot or undershoot. So for that reason, you don't get as many games as they say. Another half dozen or so are okay to play once or twice, but not quite interesting enough to come back to on a regular basis. Now, all that may not sound very good, but it leaves 10 games that I think are absolutely superb. They look great and they're a lot of fun to play. Let me show you playing examples of my pick of the 10 best games on the Atari console. First up, we have Space Invaders, one of the all-time great classics. It's simple to understand, easy to play, and it's a lot of fun to watch, even if you're not playing. Another great-looking classic is Frogger. Atari Climber may not be as popular as the first two, but it's a very simple, enjoyable game that even the youngest child will have fun with. Centipede is another great classic. The Atari console also comes with an updated version called Millipede, but I actually think the graphics and the fun factor for the original Centipede are better. Fatal Run is one of the very earliest race car games, and its primitive graphics pretty much make that obvious. But I have to admit, I have fun with this one myself. I'm embarrassed to confess that Frog Pond is one of my very favorite games. It's just so silly I can't help playing it and not laugh. The grandchildren like it a lot too. Hero has a lot going for it. The graphics are clean but simple, and it's a lot of fun to play. You drop dynamite to blow up walls so you can descend through a labyrinth to rescue trapped miners. Best of all, you can shoot lasers out of your helmet to get rid of spiders, scorpions, and bats. What more could you want? Just one trick though. Make sure after you've dropped the dynamite that you run away. If you don't, you'll get blown up with it. In Miss It, the goal is to move the black square so that the color squares don't touch it. The longer you play, the more squares appear and the faster they move. This game will drive you crazy. Rats, it got me. In Pitfall, you have to run, jump, and swing your way over obstacles in an effort to collect 34 treasures, and you only have 20 minutes to do it in. Now, in its day, this was a very popular and much talked about game. Shield Shifter is a simplified version of Space Invaders. What's nice about this is you don't have a horde of little funny aliens descending on you and speeding up as they do, so that very young children may prefer this one because it's not quite as stressful. The Sega console is quite a bit smaller than the Atari. The control units are much more anatomically friendly, and there's a slot for installing additional games. However, there's a big warning on the box stating that not all games will be compatible with this unit. One of the biggest differences between the Sega Genesis and the Atari is in the quality of the graphics in the games. And that's understandable because the Atari used games developed in the mid to late 1970s, whereas the Sega uses games developed in the early 1990s. Another big difference is that each and every game played on this unit. I did have one problem with the chess game though. I'd make a move and it would accept it. Then when I tried to do the same exact move again, it would say it's an illegal move and it would lock up. Other than that though, all these games play. Having said that, there were 9 games that even with the instructions and repeated attempts, I couldn't figure out how to win. I mean, how to play them at all, much less win. One similarity between the two consoles is that, as with the Atari, the cables are much too short, so you'll need to get extensions. One thing that parents who are concerned about the content they allow their children to play with need to know about this game is that 27 of the games, that's 1/3 of the total inventory of games, are violent fighting games. These come in 2 forms. Most of them, about 2/3 of these, are games where you view from a side and you've got a fighter who's walking along a path and he kicks, stabs, blows up, destroys, kills other men or monsters on his path. The other is the tournament game where you'll have just 2 fighters fighting it out. Some of these can be pretty gruesome, like I think it's Mortal Kombat 3. As they're hitting each other, you see blood flying all over the place. So if you don't like children being exposed to that sort of thing, this is a console you're probably not going to want to get for your young children, because as far as I can tell, there's no way to block that content from their access. While the graphics on the Sega are much better than those on the Atari, the fact is that there are fewer games on this unit that I enjoy playing. Let me show you my favorites. But before we get to the games I prefer, I wanted to show you an example of one of these combat games. And now there's like 24 that are virtually identical. The only difference is what the characters and what the monsters look like. They're all the same. The guy is just walking along and he's clobbering, kicking, stabbing, shooting various bad guys and monsters. And he walks some more and he does the same thing over and over again. So to me, they're pretty boring and not too interesting. The one exception to this is a game called Comic Zone. This is comics with an X on the end. It's about a cartoonist who gets pulled into his own cartoon strip and has to battle monsters that he himself created. Some of the things that make this game so much different than the other combat games is that there are captions, which quite a few of them are funny to read. Also that the action will stop from time to time. He'll stop fighting and he'll choose which frame of the comic strip he wants to move into, and he has to solve problems to collect treasures and of course rescue his pet rat. I wonder what his rat's name is. Another game I enjoy is called Columns. In this game, you line up objects of similar colors, and when they line up in groups of 3, either diagonally or horizontally or vertically, they disappear, and you can continue playing the game. In a way, I think this is an early precursor to the very popular Candy Crush. In Bonanza Brothers, you're hired by the owner of a warehouse to test the security of the warehouse by sneaking in, using a gun to harmlessly stun the guards, and steal various items that he's placed there. It's a non-violent game that's fun to play. Sonic the Hedgehog became so popular that it spawned a whole number of sequels. In this game, you just run along and Sonic runs into and through various objects that earn him points and tokens. In a way, it's a lot like the more modern Castle Run. Break the Line isn't one of my favorite games, but I put it in here because it's an interesting example that newer isn't always better. It's obviously just an updated version of Space Invaders, and yet while the graphics are better, the actual game isn't as much fun. So, after spending many hours playing with each console, which is the one I prefer? It's the Atari. It has more games that are fun to play, a wider range of game types, and the cruder graphics add a great fun factor to it. My grandchildren just laugh at the graphics even if they're not playing. Another thing I like about it is that it doesn't have the violent content that a lot of the games in the Sega do. If you're thinking of purchasing one of these units, I hope you found this video helpful. As always, thank you for watching. And if you have the time, I'd appreciate it if you'd stop by my main website, waynesthisthandthat.com, where you can find hundreds of pages covering a wide range of topics.